Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and today I'm going to be bringing you part 4 of the matching furniture series that I've been building for my dad's office. Now, I guess if you've been paying super close attention, bonus points for you, you probably think that this is part 5 of the series. And I guess technically it is part 5, but it's the 4th matching piece that I've built for my dad's office, and today it's a filing cabinet. But to make things super exciting, it's not just a filing cabinet. If you get super creative, you can also use it to set your printer on. No, but for real, this is a really versatile piece, so even if you don't want to use it for a filing cabinet, it makes a great storage cabinet or even a TV stand or a nightstand or whatever you want to use it for. So if you guys are ready to get building, let's go. If you followed this whole series, you may be thinking, haven't you already made your dad filing cabinets for his office? And you're right, yes, I did. I built these modular file cabinets for my dad to set his large stencil cutting machine on for his office back last fall. But apparently that wasn't enough for all of his papers, so I'm back at it building another one, this time in a design that matches the style that I built his recent table, desk, and shelf. I've got the plans, dimensions, and details in the link in the description below, and before we get into the build, I want to thank my friends at DAP for sponsoring this project. You'll see their weldwood wood glue used throughout the project, and I'll share a helpful tip that I use their rapid fuse glue for later in the project as well. If you've seen the matching table, desk, or shelf video already, this may sound like a broken record. I built these projects all with matching legs made from 2x4s, so the leg building process is the same in all of the previous videos. I trimmed down my 2x4s, paired them up, and then glued them together into 4 pair to make 4 total legs for this cabinet. Once the glue was dry, I cleaned them up on the table saw and trimmed them down so that they would all be 3x3 square posts. I cut them to their final lengths on the miter saw, and then, just to add a little decorative detail, I adjusted my miter saw to 60 degrees and trimmed a taper on 2 sides of each leg at the bottom. Again, this process probably looks pretty familiar if you've seen any of the other videos. Once the legs were ready, I moved on to cutting down the rest of the pieces for the cabinet carcass. I used my circular saw to cut down some 3/4 inch plywood pieces for the side panels, and then I used my miter saw to cut down some 2x2 pieces for the frame. Once I had my 4 legs, my 2 plywood panels, and all of my 2x2 pieces cut, I gave everything a good sanding before starting to put it all together. For assembly, I kept things simple and quick by using pocket holes and screws, but of course, if you prefer another joinery method, you are welcome to use your own method of choice. I drilled pocket holes along the edges of each plywood panel and into the ends of the 2x2 frame pieces. And just a helpful tip here, I've mentioned this before, but when I use 2x2s with pocket holes, I usually just use some wood glue and 1 screw per joint, because when I've tried to use 2 screws per joint, they tend to split fairly easy. So far, that's worked pretty well for me. I've not had any issues using wood glue and just 1 screw, but again, if you wanted to join this a different way, feel free. Then I began assembling 2 side panels using pocket hole screws and wood glue. I made sure to assemble these so that all of the pieces were flush to the inside of the legs. Once I had 2 identical side panels together, I assembled the rest of the frame using 2x2s, pocket hole screws, and wood glue. Note that I did attach the bottom 2x2s so that they were in line with the ones on the sides. This was actually a distance of 24 inches between them, but you can check out all the dimensions and everything you need to know in the plans linked below. Many times you guys ask me how I make sure that things aren't crooked when I only use one pocket hole screw per joint. And a lot of times I do that simply by assembling everything quick before the glue has time to set up, and then I set it on a known flat surface, which in my case is my table saw, and I adjust everything until the feet are flat. This time it was flat without any adjustments, so I left it there while I took a lunch break so that the glue could dry and lock it in place. If you don't have a table saw or a known flat surface, you could also use your floor, but my shop floor is definitely not level, so I avoid using it when possible. Now that the frame was together, it was time to add the drawers. First, I installed 16-inch ball-bearing drawer slides into the cabinet. I installed these about 1.5 inch inset since the drawer fronts will be about that thick. Now, you could definitely use longer slides if you wanted. I buy my drawer slides in bulk and usually stick with 16-inch because they're just a pretty universal size that I can use in almost any project. So that's what I keep on hand. But if you wanted to make larger drawers and use longer drawer slides for this, go for it. Normally, I would rip some plywood off of a plywood sheet to cut my drawer pieces down, but I've got so many random plywood scraps all over my shop and I'm really trying to get rid of all of this excess. So I found some random pieces that I could cut down to equal widths on the table saw and just trim them to length for the drawer box pieces. Once I had them cut down to size, I used my table saw to cut 1/4 inch dados along the bottom of each piece to install the drawer bottoms into. Now, when I made my dad's other filing cabinets, I used 1/4 inch plywood as the rails for the folders to slide on. I wanted to do the same thing here, so I needed to cut dados on the drawer box sides to slide the plywood into. Now I only need to cut these on the side pieces, not the front and back. And they each need to be cut about 13 inches from the edge. So I didn't get confused, I made a mark roughly where the cuts needed to be, adjusted the table saw, and cut my dados. Now the drawer boxes were ready to put together. It's a small detail, but I really like to add edge banding to the tops of my drawer boxes for a cleaner, more professional look. And while I was edge banding, I went ahead and cut down my 2 drawer fronts from my scrap pile and a top for the cabinet from my plywood sheet. Then I could edge band everything all at once. Once everything was sanded down, I drilled pocket holes into the drawer box pieces and assembled using pocket hole screws. I cut a 1/4 inch plywood bottom to insert into the dados along the bottom of the boxes, and after the whole box was together, I cut some more plywood to make the file folder rails. I used a thin scrap piece to glue and screw onto the front edge of the drawer box. I attached so that there was about 1/4 inch sticking up over the edge so that the file folder tabs can hang over. I don't have a file folder at my house to show you these, but they're the same measurements that I used for my dad's other file cabinet, so they should work fine. Once both drawers were assembled, I installed them into the cabinet. Now, originally, I planned to install these drawers so that the file folder part was towards the front. But then I got to thinking that the small space in the back might be hard to get to. It's a small space, but you can still fit some extra files, papers, cords, or whatever in there, and I just really hated for it to go to waste. So I ended up facing those small spaces towards the front of the drawer so that they're a little bit easier to access. Honestly though, I'm not really sure that this was a better option because once I got this cabinet finished, I realized that the papers and the files may have to be pulled out at an angle to avoid hitting the drawer front and the frame piece above it. It'll be fine and it still works, but in hindsight, I should have stuck with my original plan of keeping the file folder part of the drawer towards the front. Live and learn. Also, don't forget to add the screws in the very back of the drawer slides. As many screws as you can get in these slides is probably best since they'll be holding heavy files. Once the drawers were in, next up was adding the top. Now I had already cut and edge banded the 3/4 inch plywood top, so it was ready to just set in place and attach. I used 2-inch wood screws to attach it to the frame through the top 2x2s at the front and the back. And now the final step was adding the cove molding trim to the drawer fronts and the cabinet sides. Just like the previous projects, I cut to fit cove molding to glue around the edges of the drawer fronts. Now, in my previous projects in this series, when I added the trim here, I would use wood glue and painter's tape to hold it in place while it dried. It worked well, but I had to wait several hours to attach the drawer fronts because of waiting on the glue. Now, I've seen several people do this before, but it never crossed my mind to use this method here until DAP sent me some Rapid Fuse. And as soon as I opened the box, I immediately knew what I could use this for. So this time, I used wood glue on the trim pieces, but I also added a few dots of Rapid Fuse as well. Now, the Rapid Fuse will hold the pieces in place while the glue cures, so I can still get the strength of the wood glue, but I can almost immediately move on to the next part of the project and go ahead and attach them. I literally cannot believe that I didn't think of doing this before now. Once the trim was secured, I installed the drawer fronts onto the drawer boxes using wood screws from the inside. Now, as a note, you'll have to remove the 1/4 inch plywood piece in order to screw these in place. Good thing that I made those removable. It's like I planned that or something. And the final step was adding the cove molding around the sides. This time, instead of using wood glue and Rapid Fuse to attach like I did on the drawer fronts, I just used Rapid Fuse. Now honestly, I was just kind of curious if this would work, and it was just sitting on the workbench, so I thought I'd give it a try. With the drawer fronts, since they will be handled a lot, I did want to use wood glue with the Rapid Fuse. But since these pieces on the side will probably rarely be touched, I thought I could save some time having to sand off any glue squeeze out and just see if the Rapid Fuse would work fine here. I don't really foresee any issues. Everything was pretty secure, and I had a lot less mess to clean up before finishing, so I think this will probably work fine. Speaking of finishing, you all seem to really like the natural finish on the other pieces in this series, so I kept with the theme and just gave this a few coats of clear poly, added some handles, and it was ready to hand over to my dad. Now, as a side note, you can definitely add a back panel here if you wanted. You can either cut and staple 1/4 inch plywood on the back or rabbet the back and insert a panel so that it's flush. However, I didn't add a back here. I know that this is crazy, but I don't really like adding a back or a bottom panel into things with drawers. I like to leave them easily accessible in case something gets stuck. I once had a bad experience with a very expensive store-bought dresser, and it's just changed how I build my own. So anyway, that completes part 4 of the matching office furniture set. That may be the end, but there may also be one more piece to finish this whole series off. You'll just have to stay tuned to find out. So if you aren't already subscribed to my channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on it or any of the other fun projects I've got coming out soon. Don't forget, I've got the plans for this and all of the other matching pieces of this series linked below, so be sure to check that out. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!